Hi friends, welcome to another very important lecture on the topic azotemia and its clinical approach. Guys, we'll first discuss what is azotemia and how it is different from the uremia. Then we'll see how to assess the GFR in a patient. Then the approach to azotemia, which can be due to chronic renal failure and how it is different from acute renal failure. Acute renal failure we will be discussing in detail, pre-renal azotemia, intrinsic renal disease and post-renal azotemia. In intrinsic renal disease, we will have a brief discussion on acute tubular necrosis. Finally, we will see the clinical algorithm on how to approach a patient. So guys, when we see the difference between azotemia and uremia, the azotemia is defined as elevation of blood urea nitrogen and creatinine values in the blood. It is just a lab finding and has nothing to do with the clinical features. On the other hand, uremia is defined as the combination of azotemia, that is elevation of blood urea nitrogen and creatinine values in blood, along with the clinical features of renal failure and the biochemical abnormalities. Now, what are the clinical features and biochemical abnormalities? The clinical features in uremia include nausea, vomiting, anorexia, metallic taste in mouth, pruritus and uremic frost, edema, and mental confusion. On the other hand, biochemical abnormalities include acid-base abnormalities and electrolyte disturbances like hyperkalemia, hypocalcemia, etc. Now, when we consider the causes of azotemia, what can lead to elevation of blood urea nitrogen and creatinine values? These can be due to either chronic renal failure or acute renal failure. Chronic renal failure is usually associated with anemia, hypocalcemia, hyperphosphatemia, etc. On ultrasound, we will see increased echogenicity of the kidney and cortical thinning. On urine analysis, there will be proteinuria and isosthenuria. Isosthenuria means fixed specific gravity at 1.010, that is, kidney is unable to concentrate the urine. On the other hand, we will discuss acute renal failure in detail in this lecture, which can be either pre-renal azotemia, intrinsic renal disease, and post-renal azotemia. Pre-renal means there is reduced renal perfusion, reduced blood supply to the kidneys. On the other hand, in intrinsic renal disease, there is damage to renal parenchyma. There is defect in kidneys itself, be it their large arteries or tubules or glomerulus, etc. On the other hand, post-renal is due to urinary tract obstruction after the level of kidneys. Now friends, coming on to the assessment of GFR. Monitoring of GFR is very important in both hospital and outpatient settings, since GFR is the primary metric of renal function. The assessment of GFR can be done in two ways. Either there can be direct measurement or indirect measurement. Direct measurement involves administration of radioactive isotope such as inulin or iothelmate. These molecules are filtered at the level of glomerulus, but the important part is that these are neither reabsorbed nor secreted by the renal tubules. Therefore, these are ideal molecules since they will only be dependent on the glomerular filtration and will correctly assess the GFR. Now, the GFR can be calculated by calculating the clearance of inulin or iothelmate in urine in ml per minute. So, the clearance of inulin, the formula becomes urine inulin divided by plasma inulin into volume of urine, which is in 24 hours. Now coming on to the indirect measurement, it is important because in most of the clinical circumstances, direct GFR measurement is not feasible. Indirect measurement of GFR can be done with the help of either urea, creatinine or cystatin C. Urea is not used because it underestimates the GFR. Urea underestimates the GFR. Why? Because of excessive tubular reabsorption of the urea. It will underestimate the GFR. So The best molecule we can use is creatinine. The formula for creatinine clearance comes out to be urine creatinine divided by plasma creatinine into volume of urine in 24 hours. But creatinine clearance has certain cons. It overestimates GFR slightly because some amount of creatinine is also tubular secreted. Other cons is that increased plasma creatinine due to dietary ingestion can occur. If we have ingested cooked meat, there can be falsely increased values of plasma creatinine, which will suggest decline in GFR. Advanced CKD patients have PCT mediated secretion of creatinine. PCT mediated secretion of creatinine, so it will falsely overestimate the GFR. And the formulas which are using plasma creatinine are assumed to be in steady state, that is, no daily increase or decrease in plasma creatinine is considered as a result of daily changing in GFR. The formula which is used for calculating GFR is Cockcroft-Gault formula. Now, this formula comes out to be GFR in ml per minute is equals to 140 minus age multiplied by weight of the patient in kg, and this whole is divided by 72 and serum creatinine, which is milligram per deciliter. If the patient is a female, then additionally we multiply this by 0.85. Now, after we have discussed the GFR calculation with the help of creatinine, let's have a brief discussion about cystatin C. Now, this cystatin C can also be used for calculation of GFR. It is a member of cysteine protease inhibitor, which is produced at a relatively constant rate from all the nucleated cells of the body. For early GFR decline, cystatin C is a better marker for calculation of GFR than serum creatinine. But like the serum creatinine, cystatin C is also influenced by factors like age, sex, race, and it is increased in diabetes, smoking, and any cause of inflammation, since it is a marker of inflammation. So these are the factors which will affect the cystatin C. Now let's move on to the approach to azotemia. Once GFR reduction has been established, the physician must decide whether it is due to acute or chronic renal failure. This can be distinguished based on clinical history, lab data. If azotemia is due to chronic renal failure, the clinical features which are usually found are edema, pallor, weakness, nausea, metallic taste, and skin changes. Lab findings usually reveal anemia, hypocalcemia, and hyperphosphatemia, which are less common in the acute renal failure. On radiology, there is renal osteodystrophy. This is a specific finding for chronic renal failure, but it is a very late finding, and it is usually present in end stage renal disease patients who are on maintenance hemodialysis. USG is very helpful in identify chronic renal failure, which reveals small kidneys, increase in echogenicity, and there is cortical thinning. In chronic renal failure, the urine analysis usually have proteinuria and isostenuria. Isostenuria is also seen in acute renal failure due to acute tubular necrosis. This occurs in any cause which damages the tubules. Since CKD as well as acute tubular necrosis has dysfunctional tubules, these will lead to isostenuria, that is fixed specific gravity. This is non-concentrated urine which is isoosmotic to plasma, and as we have discussed, this is due to damage to the tubules. Now in the next slides, we will discuss acute renal failure in detail, which are due to three causes, which can be pre-renal, intrinsic, and post-renal. Pre-renal is due to decreased blood flow and glomerular perfusion. Intrinsic renal disease is due to damage to small vessels, glomeruli, or tubules. Post-renal can be due to urinary tract obstruction in ureters, bladder or urethra. Now let's begin our discussion with prerenal azotemia. This is the most common cause of acute renal failure, and it is responsible for 40 to 80% of all the cases of acute renal failure. The most important part is that it is readily reversible if treated on time. When we discuss the causes of prerenal azotemia, any cause which leads to renal hypoperfusion can lead to prerenal azotemia. So, taking them one by one, the most common cause is decreased hydrostatic pressure, that is hypovolemia. Now, this hypovolemia can be due to water loss in the form of diarrhea or vomiting, blood loss in the form of hemorrhage, plasma loss due to severe burns or acute pancreatitis or dengue fever, and there can be loss into third spaces, which is ascites, pleural effusion, etc. So, hypovolemia is the most common cause leading to prerenal azotemia. Now, discussing about the other causes, there can be decreased cardiac output. Decreased cardiac output can be seen with left ventricular failure or cardiac tamponade, in which there is restriction of pumping activity of the heart. Now, very important cause to discuss is alteration of systemic to renal vascular diameter. There can be either systemic vasodilatation, which can lead to pooling of blood in the systemic circulation, and there is subsequently less blood flow to the kidney. This can occur in the septic shock or anaphylactic shock. On the other hand, there can be renal vasoconstriction. This can occur because of hypercalcemia or drug use like amphotericin B. Hypercalcemia and amphotericin B leads to renal vasoconstriction, or there can be a combination of both, that is systemic vasodilatation as well as renal vasoconstriction. What is this disorder in which both these are seen? This is hepatorenal syndrome. Now, for understanding of the next cause, it is very important to discuss the afferent and efferent arteriole diameter. So, if this is afferent arteriole and this is efferent arteriole, the afferent arteriole is dilated with the help of prostaglandins, and the efferent arteriole is constricted with the help of angiotensin II. And this dilatation of afferent and constriction of efferent arteriole is very important for the maintenance of glomerular filtration. Now, if there is any cause of hypovolemia like decreased hydrostatic pressure, or there can be decreased cardiac output, means there can be any true or effective arterial hypovolemia. There is activation of neural and humoral responses, which leads to increased renin-angiotensin system, increased ADH, and increased sympathetic nervous system activity. This leads to increase in prostaglandins, which leads to afferent arteriole dilatation and leads to increase in angiotensin II due to RAS activity. This will lead to constriction of efferent arteriole, and this will maintain the GFR. But if there is afferent-efferent arteriole diameter alteration, this will lead to prerenal azotemia. How it can be possible? Either we have inhibited the prostaglandin or we have inhibited the angiotensin II. So, prostaglandin inhibition can be due to use of NSAIDs, and angiotensin II inhibition is with the help of ACE inhibitors or ARBs. So, this is the reason why the patients with bilateral renal artery stenosis or the stenosis in solitary kidney who are dependent on angiotensin II for the constriction of efferent arteriole and are maintaining GFR somehow, ACE inhibitors and ARBs are contraindicated in such patients. This will lead to dilatation of efferent arteriole and complete shutdown of the kidney function. Now, after we have discussed the most common cause of ARF, that is pre-renal causes, we will come to the discussion of intrinsic renal disease. These are responsible for 20 to 50% of all the cases of ARF. The intrinsic renal disease can arise from processes involving either the large vessels of kidney like renal artery, renal vein, or the small vessels and intrarenal microvasculature, or there can be damage to glomerulus and the processes involving the tubules and interstitium. Now, when we come to the individual causes, the most common cause of intrinsic renal disease is acute tubular necrosis, which is responsible for 90% of the all intrinsic causes. Now, pre-renal azotemia and acute tubular necrosis, these both are the part of spectrum of hypoperfusion, where long-standing hypoperfusion can lead to structural tubular injury, and this will be known as acute tubular necrosis. What happens is, when there is hypoperfusion and it is treated on time, it is reversible. This will be pre-renal azotemia. This is a cause of pre-renal. But if this hypoperfusion is long-standing and not treated on time, this will lead to tubular damage, that is structural damage, and this will be known as acute tubular necrosis, which is the most common cause among the intrinsic causes. This pre-renal azotemia and acute tubular necrosis can be distinguished by urine analysis and the urine electrolyte composition. This can be distinguished based on the urine studies, which we will discuss in this lecture. Now, after we have discussed the most common cause of intrinsic renal disease, some rare causes leading to intrinsic disease is acute renal artery embolization, acute renal vein thrombosis, small vessel diseases like hemolytic uremic syndrome, TTP, that is thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura. And finally, intrinsic renal disease can also be due to acute glomerulonephritis. This renal artery can have either embolization or thrombosis, which can be either of the process like atherothrombi, thromboembolism, in situ thrombosis in the renal artery itself, aortic dissection, and vasculitis. The difference in urine between the renal artery thrombosis and renal vein thrombosis is that the renal artery thrombosis will have only mild proteinuria and hematuria. On the other hand, the renal vein thrombosis will have very heavy proteinuria as well as hematuria. The occlusion of these large vessels, that is renal artery and renal vein, is very uncommon, and if it is present, a significant decrease in GFR will suggest either there is bilateral process or unilateral process in a single functional kidney. Other rare causes can have small vessel disease like HUS and TTP and acute glomerulonephritis. These usually present with various combinations of glomerular injury like proteinuria, hematuria, decrease in GFR, hypertension, edema, etc. Now, one important concept is that whenever there are RBC cast or dysmorphic RBCs in the urine, these are usually due to glomerular processes, and it is an indication of early renal biopsy, so that we can identify the cause before the renal function declines severely. And as we have already discussed that ischemic acute tubular necrosis is pre-renal causes leading to structural tubular injury. Now, coming on to the discussion of acute tubular necrosis, we are discussing this because it is the most common cause of the intrinsic renal disease. It can be due to either ischemia or toxin. Ischemic acute tubular necrosis or toxin induced acute tubular necrosis. This ischemic ATN is same we have been discussing, that is pre-renal causes leading to structural renal injury, that is damage to the tubules. Therefore, this will have all the causes of pre-renal azotemia. On the other hand, toxin-induced acute tubular necrosis can be either due to endogenous toxins or exogenous toxins. Let's discuss them one by one. Now, the endogenous toxins can be myoglobin, hemoglobin, uric acid, light chain, calcium and oxalic acid. Myoglobin is increased due to rhabdomyolysis, which can seen in status epilepticus, crush injury due to any road traffic accident, heat stroke, sea snake bite, whose toxin is myotoxic, and the drugs which are statins. On the other hand, hemoglobin can reach the tubules due to hemolysis, specifically intravascular hemolysis, which can be seen in hereditary spherocytosis, SLE, PNH, that is paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, and enzyme deficiency like G6PD. Uric acid can be seen in tumor lysis syndrome, which occurs after chemotherapy of any tumor, specifically AML and other blood tumors. Light chain as well as calcium. These both are present in multiple myeloma. These both are reaching the kidney in multiple myeloma. Oxalic acid can cause the damage in cases of ethylene glycol ingestion. Now, after we have discussed all the endogenous toxins, the exogenous toxins can be in the form of drugs like amphotericin B, aminoglycosides, and there can be radio contrast agents which leading to acute tubular necrosis. Now guys, it is very important to note that the pre-renal causes and intrinsic renal causes due to acute tubular necrosis can be differentiated on the basis of urine analysis and urine electrolyte measurement. First of all, it should be noted that in pre-renal causes there is no structural injury and the tubules are normally functional. On the other hand, in intrinsic renal, the tubules are damaged and are non-functional. Tubules are damaged. So, suppose this is our glomerulus and these are the tubules and these are the tubular cells. These tubular cells will be completely fine in the cases of pre-renal, but these are damaged in cases of renal. So, whenever sodium is coming filtered through the glomerulus, this will be reabsorbed in the pre-renal causes but will leave the PCT and other tubules unchanged in renal intrinsic renal failure due to ATN, since tubules are damaged and no reabsorption of sodium will occur. Also, since the tubules are functional in pre-renal, there will be slight creatinine tubular secretion. Tubular secretion of creatinine will occur in cases of pre-renal, but there will be no tubular secretion of creatinine in cases of intrinsic ARF due to ATN. So, looking at all the investigations one by one, first of all, it is fractional excretion of sodium. It is the most sensitive investigation to differentiate pre-renal from acute tubular necrosis, and it is defined as sodium clearance upon creatinine clearance multiplied by 100. So in pre-renal, the tubules are functional and sodium will be reabsorbed from the tubules. The fractional excretion will be less than 1%. On the other hand, in ATN, the tubules are non-functional and sodium will be present in the urine. More of the sodium will be present in urine. So the fractional excretion of sodium is more than 2%. When we see the absolute values of urine sodium, it will be less than 20 millimole per liter in pre-renal and more than 20 to 40 millimole per liter in cases of ATN, specifically 40. Now since pre-renal have normal tubules, there will be tubular secretion of creatinine in pre-renal, but no tubular secretion will occur in intrinsic ARF due to ATN. So when we consider the blood urea nitrogen upon serum creatinine, if it is both of these are increasing, the serum creatinine which is tubular secreted in pre-renal, there will be decreased serum creatine since it is tubular secreted from the kidneys. On the other hand, this will be remain unchanged in cases of intrinsic. So the absolute value of blood urea nitrogen upon serum creatine ratio will be more than 20 in cases of pre-renal and less than 10 in cases of renal. Since in this the denominator is decreasing, therefore the total value will increase. When we consider the urine creatinine upon plasma creatinine, in pre-renal, urine creatinine due to tubular secretion, urine creatinine is increasing and plasma creatinine is therefore decreasing. So the urine creatinine upon plasma creatinine will be more than 40 in cases of pre-renal, but in intrinsic, urine creatinine is normal, that is not increasing due to tubular secretion, and plasma creatinine is also normal, so it will be less than 20. Normal means no change through the tubular secretion. There will be no change through tubular secretion. Both of them are increased, that is urine creatinine and plasma creatinine both are increased. There the ratio will come less than 20. When we consider the urine osmolality in milliosmol per liter, since the tubules are functional and are able to concentrate the urine, it will be more than 500 milliosmol per liter in cases of pre-renal and less than 350 in cases of ATN. The specific gravity similarly will be more in pre-renal due to functional tubules, and it will be isosthenuria fixed at 1.010. This is known as isosthenuria, which can be seen due to tubular damage either in ATN or CKD. Casts which are seen in pre-renal are hyaline cast, which is also known as benign cast, also known as transparent cast. This is the cast which is formed of TAM Horsfall protein. On the other hand, in ATN there will be granular cast due to necrosed tubular cells, which is also known as muddy brown cast due to its appearance, muddy brown cast. So we have seen the differences between pre-renal and intrinsic renal on the basis of urine analysis and urine electrolytes. Now coming on to the last and least common cause of acute renal failure, that is post-renal azotemia. This is responsible for only less than 5% of all the cases of ARF. These are usually reversible. These must be ruled out early in the evaluation. The causes can be obstruction at the common tract, that is bladder or urethra, or there can be bilateral uretral obstruction, or there can be unilateral obstruction if a patient is having single functional kidney. The USG examination, the USG ultrasonography may be unrevealing in early course or due to inability of ureter to dilate, which can be due to either tumors or retroperitoneal fibrosis. So in early course there may be unrevealing USG, but the usual finding which is seen on USG is hydroureteronephrosis, which is due to ureteric and renal pelvis dilatation. Nuclear studies are important, like furosemide renogram with the help of MAC3. These may be required to better define the presence or absence of the obstructive uropathy, especially in the early cases. Now friends, coming on to the last but most important part of this presentation, that is the algorithm to how to approach a patient of azotemia. Whenever a patient comes with azotemia, that is blood reports are suggestive of increased urea and creatinine, increased blood urea nitrogen and creatinine, we will suggest the patient for urine analysis and a renal ultrasound. If on renal ultrasound hydronephrosis is seen, it will be a post-renal cause and it will require a urologic evaluation and relieving the obstruction. If the hydronephrosis is not seen, we will see whether there is any comment on renal size, parenchyma, echo texture, and also see the urine analysis. If on USG there are small kidneys with thin cortex, bland sediment, and the urine analysis has isostenuria less than 3.5 gram protein per 24 hours, then it is the diagnosis of chronic renal failure, and we will suggest symptomatic treatment and we will try to delay the progression. If it is end stage, then prepare the patient for dialysis. On the other hand, if the USG is neither having hydronephrosis nor the kidneys are small, the kidneys are normal and having intact parenchyma, then the diagnosis of ARF, that is acute renal failure, is made. Now, based on the urine analysis, if the urine analysis is also normal with oliguria, we will then go for urine electrolytes. If the urine electrolytes, as we have discussed, is suggesting of fractional excretion of sodium less than 1% and urine osmolality more than 500 milliosmol, this means the tubules are normally functional and it is a pre-renal azotemia, which can be due to causes we have discussed like volume contraction, cardiac failure, vasodilation, drug, sepsis, renal vasoconstriction, and impaired autoregulation between afferent and efferent arteriole. On the other hand, if the fractional excretion is more than 1 to 2% and the urine osmolality is less than 350, it will be acute tubular necrosis, which is the most common cause of ARF. On the other hand, if the patient is having abnormal urine analysis, which can show either bacteria, this bacteria along with WBC, cast, eosinophil will suggest pyelonephritis. If only WBCs, cast and eosinophils are seen, it is interstitial nephritis. If RBCs are seen, this can be, if the formed RBCs are seen, this will be renal artery or vein occlusion. In renal artery occlusion, there will be only mild hematuria and mild proteinuria. In renal vein occlusion, there will be heavy proteinuria and hematuria. For this, if we are suspecting artery or vein occlusion, the next investigation is angiogram. On the other hand, the patient is having RBC cast, that is, these are the broken RBCs which are forming a cast by clumping together, and also the patient is having proteinuria, then we have to go for early renal biopsy to rule out glomerulonephritis or vasculitis, that is small vessel disease like HUS TTP, which can be immune complex mediated or anti-glomerular basement membrane disease. Thank you so much, guys.